The crowd gathered in silence, not the silence of peace, but the kind that hangs before something breaks. In the shadow of the forum, beneath the towering presence of the Senate, a single man stepped forward. He wore no crown, no armor, no symbol of military power, and yet the most powerful men in Rome feared him. Because with a single word, he could stop them. Veto. It did not echo loudly. It did not need to. That one word could halt laws, block decisions, and bring the machinery of the Republic to a standstill. For centuries, Rome had been ruled by elites, senators, generals, men of ancient families who controlled power as if it were their birthright. But beneath them lived the masses. The plebeians, farmers, laborers, soldiers, citizens who fought Rome's wars, yet struggled to survive within it. They had no voice, until they created one. The tribune of the plebs, a position born not from tradition, but from defiance, protected by law, untouchable by authority, and capable of challenging the very system that created it. But power like this did not come without consequence, because in Rome, to stand between the people and the elite was to stand in the path of danger. The Roman Republic was not built on equality. From its earliest days, society was divided between two broad groups, the patricians and the plebeians. The patricians were the elite, families who claimed ancient lineage and held control over political, religious, and legal institutions. The plebeians, by contrast, made up the vast majority of the population. They were farmers, craftsmen, traders, and soldiers. They worked the land, filled the ranks of the army, and sustained the economy. Yet despite their importance, they held little power in the political system that governed their lives. This imbalance created tension that would shape the early history of the Republic. Plebeians faced debt, legal inequality, and exclusion from decision-making. In times of crisis, they were expected to defend Rome. In times of peace, they were often left to struggle under the authority of those who governed them. Over time, this disparity became impossible to ignore. The breaking point came in a moment that would later be remembered as the first major act of collective resistance in Roman history. In the early 5th century BC, plebeians withdrew from the city in what is known as the secesio plebis, the secession of the plebs. They refused to work, to fight, or to participate in the life of Rome. It was not a violent rebellion. It was something quieter and more effective. They simply left. Without them, the city could not function. Fields went untilled. Armies could not be raised. The structure of Roman society began to falter. Faced with this crisis, the patrician leadership was forced to negotiate. The result was the creation of a new office, the Tribune of the Plebs. This position was unlike any other in the Roman system. It did not arise from the Senate or the traditional structures of power. It was created specifically to protect the interests of the plebeians. The tribunes were elected by the people, not appointed by elites. And once in office, they possessed a unique form of authority that would reshape Roman politics. One of their most powerful tools was the right of intercessio, the ability to intervene in political decisions. A tribune could block the actions of magistrates, halt legal proceedings, and prevent laws from being passed. This power was expressed through a single word, veto, meaning I forbid. It was a simple act, but its implications were profound. For the first time, the decisions of Rome's ruling class could be directly challenged by a representative of the people. Even more remarkable was the concept of sacrosanctitas, the sacred inviolability of the tribune. Once elected, a tribune's person was considered legally protected. To harm a tribune was not merely a crime. It was a violation of religious law. This protection was intended to ensure that tribunes could perform their duties without fear of retaliation from powerful opponents. In theory, it made them untouchable. In practice, it made them targets. The tribune of the plebs became a symbol of resistance within the republic. They stood between the people and the elite, acting as both protector and advocate. They could summon assemblies, propose legislation, and bring grievances directly into the political arena. Over time, their influence expanded. What began as a defensive role evolved into a position capable of shaping the direction of the state itself. Yet this power was not always used in the same way. Some tribunes worked within the system, negotiating with the Senate and seeking gradual reform. Others took a more confrontational approach, using their authority to challenge existing structures and push for significant change. Among the most famous of these figures were Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus, brothers who would become central to one of the most dramatic periods of political conflict in Roman history. Tiberius Gracchus, elected tribune in 133 BC, sought to address the growing inequality in land ownership. Large estates controlled by the elite had displaced many small farmers, leaving them without livelihoods. Tiberius proposed reforms to redistribute land to the poor, a move that directly threatened the interests of powerful senators. His actions were bold and controversial. When opposition blocked his efforts, he used his authority as tribune to bypass traditional procedures. The conflict escalated rapidly. Accusations of tyranny spread. Tensions rose within the city, and eventually, violence erupted. Tiberius Gracchus was killed in a confrontation with his political opponents, beaten to death along with many of his supporters. His death marked a turning point. The sacrosanctity of the tribune, the very protection that defined the office, had been broken. A line had been crossed. Years later, his brother Gaius Gracchus followed a similar path. More ambitious and more politically skilled, Gaius expanded the scope of reform, addressing not only land distribution but also grain supply, legal rights, and citizenship. He built a broad base of support among the people, using the power of the tribunate to push for change on multiple fronts. But like his brother, he faced fierce opposition. As tensions escalated, the Senate issued a decree granting extraordinary powers to suppress the unrest. Violence once again consumed the city. Gaius Gracchus, facing inevitable defeat, chose death rather than capture. The deaths of the Gracchi revealed the dangerous reality of the tribunate. It was a position designed to protect the people, but it existed within a system that resisted change. When the power of the tribune threatened the interests of the elite, the response could be swift and brutal. The office that was meant to stand above fear became entangled in it. Despite these challenges, the tribune of the plebs remained a central part of Roman political life. Its existence reflected a fundamental tension within the republic, a balance between authority and resistance, between control and representation. The tribunes did not eliminate inequality, nor did they resolve all conflicts between social classes, but they created a space where those conflicts could be expressed, challenged, and sometimes addressed. They gave the plebeians a voice within a system that had once excluded them entirely. And in doing so, they changed the nature of Roman politics forever. Yet the story of the tribunate is not one of simple progress. It is a story of power, how it is gained, how it is used, and how it can be contested. It is a story of individuals who stood at the intersection of competing forces, navigating a path between duty and danger. And as the republic continued to evolve, the role of the tribune would shift once again, shaped by the very struggles it was created to address. The power of the tribune of the plebs was never meant to be quiet. It was meant to interrupt, to interfere, to stand in the path of authority and say, "No." But as the Roman Republic grew, so too did the complexity of its politics. The tribunate, once a shield for the oppressed, began to change. It did not lose its power. If anything, its influence expanded. But the way that power was used became less predictable and far more dangerous. Because in Rome, Any position that could command the will of the people could also be turned into a weapon. After the deaths of Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus, the Republic entered a new phase. The illusion that political conflict could remain contained within law and tradition had been shattered. Violence had entered the system, not as an exception, but as a method, and the tribunate stood at the center of it. In the decades that followed, tribunes were no longer seen only as protectors of the people. They became political actors in a far more aggressive arena. Some aligned themselves with popular causes, using their authority to challenge the Senate and push reforms. Others allied with powerful elites, using the tribunate to block opposition and maintain control. The office had not changed, but the republic around it had. The veto, once a tool of defense, became a means of obstruction. Tribunes could paralyze the state, halting decisions, delaying action, forcing negotiations. In a stable system, this power created balance. In an unstable one, it created deadlock, and deadlock bred frustration. Frustration bred anger, and anger led to something darker. Political life in Rome grew increasingly volatile. Rival factions competed for influence, each seeking to control the mechanisms of the republic. Elections became tense, unpredictable, sometimes violent. Public assemblies, once forums for debate, turned into arenas of pressure and intimidation. The tribunes stood in the middle of it all. Their voices carried weight. Their decisions carried consequences, and their survival was never guaranteed. One of the most revealing examples of how the tribunate could be reshaped by power is found in the career of Publius Clodius Pulcher. Clodius was not a traditional champion of the people. Born into a patrician family, he maneuvered his way into the tribunate through political strategy, renouncing his elite status to qualify for the office. Once elected, he used the powers of the tribunate with calculated precision. He passed laws that strengthened his position. He targeted political enemies. He mobilized support not only through speeches, but through force. Clodius maintained armed gangs in the streets of Rome, using them to intimidate opponents and influence public gatherings. Violence became a tool of politics, not hidden, but visible. Accepted, feared. Under figures like Clodius, the tribunate became something else entirely. Not just a voice of the people, but a force capable of shaping events through pressure, fear, and control. The republic, already strained, began to bend further under this weight. At the same time, larger figures emerged on the Roman stage, men whose ambitions extended beyond the limits of traditional politics. Among them was Julius Caesar, a man who understood the power of popular support and the importance of controlling it. Caesar did not hold the tribunate in the way others had, but he recognized its significance. Tribunes could influence public opinion, block opposition, and legitimize actions through the voice of the people. Aligning with them or controlling them became a strategic necessity. During moments of tension between Caesar and the Senate, tribunes who supported him played critical roles. They could intervene in proceedings, challenge authority, and frame conflicts as struggles between the people and the elite. The language of the tribunate, protection, representation, resistance, became part of a larger political narrative, one that would ultimately reshape the republic itself. But even as the tribunate remained powerful, its original purpose became harder to recognize. The line between protector and politician blurred. The voice of the people became entangled with the ambitions of individuals. And the system, already weakened, struggled to contain the forces it had created. As the republic moved toward its final years, the structures that once maintained balance began to collapse. Civil wars erupted. Alliances formed and broke apart. Authority shifted from institutions to individuals. In this environment, the tribunate still existed, but it no longer held the same meaning. It was no longer a barrier against power. It had become part of the struggle for it. When the Republic gave way to the Empire, the role of the tribune changed once again. Under the rule of Augustus, the office was not abolished, but it was absorbed. Augustus himself took on tribunician power, using it as part of his authority. The language of protection remained, but it now served the emperor. The voice of the people had been brought under control. What had once been a force of resistance became a tool of stability. Or perhaps, a tool of silence. The tribune of the plebs was born from defiance, from a moment when the powerless refused to remain silent, when they walked away from the city and forced Rome to listen. For a time it worked. The tribune stood as a barrier between the people and those who ruled them. They could stop injustice, challenge authority, and give voice to those who had none. But power never remained simple. Over time the office changed, it adapted. It was used, reshaped, and drawn into the very system it was meant to oppose. The line between protection and control began to fade. By the end of the Republic, the tribunate no longer stood apart from power. It was part of it. And when the empire rose, the voice that once spoke for the people was no longer independent. It had been absorbed, contained, redefined. The story of the tribune of the plebs is not just a story of political reform. It is a story of what happens when resistance becomes institutional, when power is given a voice, and that voice is slowly taken back, because in Rome, even those who spoke for the people were never truly free from the system they tried to change.